Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Food Safety and Return to Work webinar presented by Gavin Buckett. Great to have such a large audience throughout the country today. So welcome, everyone. My name's Michelle, and I'm the Membership and Partnership Manager with the Accommodation Association. Just before I introduce Gavin, I just wanted to have a quick yell out to all our sponsors. To just say thank you to our sponsors, Host Plus and American Express. Our sponsors are working very hard to meet all our members' expectations and to deliver fabulous service over this challenging time. One sponsor partner I wanted to mention was NCP. NCP provide all the material that you require in your properties for social distancing, and so that's a great advantage. And many of our members have approached NCP to provide that material during this time. Also, at the start of COVID, we launched our online training courses. The training courses Gavin features in many of them with all the food safety requirements. Last week we launched the COVID Return to Work training course for your staff to do to ensure that they're prepared to return to work. So visit our website and go to our online training courses, and you'll be able to access that Return to Work course for your staff when they return. So Gavin Buckett, the Gourmet Gardener, Gourmet Gardener. He's Australian's food specialist provider to the hotel sector. Gavin has spent over 15 years cooking in hotels. He's a qualified chef, and he specialises in food safety for the hotel sector. Gavin is going to join us today to provide you with tips and practical solutions to how to reopen or to ensure that your property and your food outlet is safe, and that you need all the solutions to manage your customer and employees' expectations. Gavin spent the last 3 months travelling around the countryside and around the country when he's allowed to look how operations have opened during this time. So he's going to share his insights with us today, and over to you. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you, Michelle. There we go. Can we see that? Good morning. As Michelle said, my name is Gavin Buckett from the Gourmet Guardian. We've also got a separate company called Prime Skills, which is a registered training organisation. As Michelle said, my background is I am a chef by trade. I work in predominantly hotels, as well as the Melbourne Exhibition and Convention Centre during my cooking time. And for the last 16 or 17 years, we've been providing a range of different food safety services to the food service sector, which includes hotels and hospitality businesses. When I finished cooking, I went back and did a diploma of food technology and a diploma of confectionery manufacture, and I also have a certificate for an assessment and workplace training. There's a number of food safety articles that I write, including one that comes out in a magazine called Food for Thought, and there's a number of radio and TV newspaper interviews that I've participated in as well. The Gourmet Guardian, as Michelle alluded to, we are Australian food safety specialists. We provide a number of different services, including internal food safety audits. We do a lot of hotel internal audits. We also conduct regulatory audits, including HACCP audits, vulnerable person audits, and in states where they're required, auditing of non-standard food safety programs. As an auditor, I'm approved in Tasmania, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, and I'm currently going through the process to be approved in Western Australia as well. Our company also develops and writes a lot of food safety programs, including for people that are on this call. We write a whole range of different food safety programs depending on what the client needs. So that might be to meet the requirements of the Local Food Act, it might be to meet HACCP, or it might be other food quality management systems that are needed by the supermarkets and other large caterers like Spotless. We provide a range of quality assurance services, including labelling and allergen advice, and we also do some professional development for council health officers. As indicated, we work with all areas of the food industry. So we do work with a number of sporting stadiums, fast food businesses, retail outlets, manufacturers, central production kitchens, restaurants, as well as many hotels as well. Today's webinar, we're going to get through a fair bit, I hope. We're going to talk about COVID-19 and how that relates to the food industry. We're going to talk about if there's been any legislative changes relating to food safety as a result of COVID-19, and talk about some of the key food safety controls that need to be managed during the current pandemic. I'll raise with you some potential hazards. I know that every state is different at the moment. I'm based in Melbourne, and we're currently locking things down again, whereby I'm fully aware that in states like Western Australia and the Northern Territory, they've got their bars open, they've got their nightclubs open. You know, things are very, very different across each of the different states. So I'm not going to talk about the individual requirements in each of the states. I'm just going to raise some of the potential hazards with you that you might have considered or you might not have considered as a result of the changed operations that you're going through. I'll share with you some COVID safe practices that I recommend, and also some practices that I've seen. And then I want to share some of my own personal experiences, because I have been travelling during the current shutdown. From an accommodation perspective, maybe some of the guest considerations that you might not have thought of that your guests are encountering before they actually arrive at your property. So I'll share some of those experiences with you as well. If we've got time, I want to show you some social distancing and some PR opportunities that stand out, and I've got some links to some food safety resources as well. There are a couple of slides that are duplicated from a presentation I did back in April. I do apologise for the people that are on the call that have seen those, but I think it's important for the others that were not on that webinar to cover off on those things as well. My understanding from looking at the registration list is that there's less than 10% of people on this webinar that were on the webinar back in April. The source of my information is from the government health departments, including the Department of Health of Australia, the Department of Health and Human Services in Victoria, and the New South Wales Food Authority. There are also some references that I've taken from the World Health Organisation and from the Produce Marketing Association of Australia and New Zealand. Some of the photos that I'm going to share with you and some of my experiences are based on my own personal experiences, and some of the things that I saw that I want to share with you as well. To start from a food safety perspective, we need to understand that COVID-19 is not a foodborne disease. The current advice from the World Health Organisation, Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, and other government departments is that at present there's been no evidence that COVID-19 has been transmitted by food. Food has not been identified as the source or the route of transmission of any of the positive COVID-19 cases, as far as I understand. The best description I've heard of COVID-19 is that COVID-19 is a wimpy virus. It's highly contagious, but it's very easily killed, okay? While our food supply chain is safe, we need to understand that COVID-19 is an additional hazard or an additional risk that we need to manage and control. It doesn't replace the food safety hazards that we had in place prior to the current lockdown and the current shutdowns. So while I understand that there's a lot of focus on the COVID-19 controls, whether it be social distancing, whether it be sanitising, whether it be the number of guests that you can have, the food safety hazards that existed pre-February still exist today. And we just need to be aware of that. To highlight that, there was a bakery here in Melbourne about 2 months ago where dozens and dozens of people came down with salmonella poisoning, even though they were just doing takeaways. So it's a very real risk around the food safety that we need to control, in addition to the COVID-19 controls that you have in place. From a legislative perspective, there have been no changes. So if you're in Victoria, all food businesses that are rated as a Class 2, if you're preparing potentially hazardous food, need to have a food safety program with associated monitoring records. If you are trading, you still need to be completing those monitoring records, and the councils will still be checking. If you're not operating a particular bar or a particular area, you don't need to be completing records in areas that are not being used. But if you're running on reduced operations, the records need to be completed in the areas that you are using. If you've got a non-standard food safety program and require an external audit, then those audits still need to be conducted. One of the benefits in Victoria is that there is no anniversary date. You just need to have an audit once per licensing period. So you can push the audit back a little bit if you want, and some of the auditors are offering remote options. In Queensland, for the hotels that are licensed as a caterer, the audits need to be conducted by the anniversary date. So Queensland's quite different than Victoria. In Victoria, you need to have an audit once per licensing period. So you might go 18 months without having an audit and then have an audit, 2 audits within 6 months. But in Queensland, the council has your anniversary date and you need to conduct those audits on or before those anniversary dates. If you're not trading or you've got no events on at the moment, you're still required to have those audits. There is an acknowledgement from Queensland Health that the audit may not be conducted to view catering being conducted. If you've got FSSC 22000 or you've got HACCP, then you just need to speak to your certification company. There are alternatives that can be discussed, some of them being remote, but most of those audits are still continuing as well. There's been no changes in any of the legislation that relates to food safety as a result of COVID-19. All of the controls that you're putting in place are in addition to it. You might have the best sanitising stations and the most out there social distancing signage, and you've got all the sign-in controls if you're using QR codes and those sorts of things. But if you go and cut a sandwich on a chopping board that's been used to cut raw chicken, or you put a meal on a plate that hasn't been sanitised properly, the food poisoning risks that existed pre-February still exist today. We just need to understand that COVID is an additional hazard that we need to manage. The key food safety controls from the Department of Health that need to be applied. I know that hand washing is always front and centre. We need to make sure that we're using warm water. We need to make sure that we've got dispensable liquid or foam soap, and that we're washing our hands for at least 20 seconds. Rinse the soap off, and where possible, use paper towel. Personal hygiene is still vitally important. Cleaning and sanitising of our food contact surfaces still needs to continue. Any surface that comes in contact with food needs to be cleaned and sanitised. That can be through the application of heat and or chemical, or a combination of both. If you've got commercial dishwashers, they need to be operating at their rinse temperature at 82 degrees or above. When you're looking at the cleaning and sanitising of food contact surfaces, think about the contact surfaces that are in your guest rooms as well. I know that some properties are putting disposable cups in place, or they're only putting cups and glasses in when the guests arrive. We still need to cook our food to the temperatures that kill the pathogens that are present. And if we're cooling cooked food down, we need to make sure that we apply the 2-hour, 4-hour rule to get the cooked food cold as quickly as possible. If we're storing food, we need to store it below 5 degrees, and if we've got hot food, we need to store that at above 60 degrees. One of the challenges that you'll be facing is that if you've got reduced operations or you've got reduced customers coming through, you may be keeping food for longer than what you would have done previously. The times and temperatures that applied pre-February still apply today. I need to stress that nothing has changed in relation to the food safety controls that should be applied. These are what your employees should already be doing. They should have been washing their hands with liquid soap, with warm water, and washing them for 20 seconds. That message is unchanged since I started doing training back in 2004. In relation to personal hygiene, I know that there's a lot of posters and signage around the importance of hand sanitizer, especially for guests, especially if you've got food that is being handled and consumed with their hands. It might be things like sushi, or it might be pizza and things like that. Having hand sanitizer available is really important. For your staff, hand washing is much more effective than using a hand sanitizer. Being careful where we cough, being careful where we sneeze. If we've got tissues, make sure that they're only used once and we're not tucking them into sleeves, we're not tucking them into pockets, we're not leaving them on benches or in desk drawers or other sorts of places. With our hand washing, I recommend using paper towel over using hand dryers. We need to be careful of the clothes that we're wearing, separating the clothes that we've worn outside, especially if staff are coming on public transport or other shared forms of transport, getting changed into clean uniforms that are only kept at work. I recommend that the staff have shoes that they get changed into at work, and those shoes stay at the hotel and not go outside as well. Think about your employees when they go home. Are they going home to shared houses? Are they going home to, in Melbourne, we've got hotspot suburbs and things like that. So think about the potential risks when they're going home as well. I know as a chef, we were basically told that unless we were dead, that we had to turn up to work. The old adage of I don't care how sick you are, get your ass in here. I think most of the chefs would have been raised on that. At present, we need to really encourage employees to self-report. We need to make them feel assured that if they are suffering any of those flu-like symptoms, that they do need to report that and do need to feel comfortable that they're not going to be punished as a result of that. A number of hotels and properties are doing temperature checks on employees, might be through security, might be through separate entrances, and those temperature checks are being recorded. If you're doing that, then I would be suggesting that you do that every day, not just random. We need to think about different hazards if our operations have changed. So if we've got less customers, if we've got more customers, if we've got less employees available, or the employees that we've got available have different skill sets, then that's going to raise additional hazards in our business. We need to think about how we implement the social distancing controls while still maintaining the food safety controls that we have in place as well. I know that a lot of food businesses are selling different products. I'm aware of restaurants and hotels that are selling groceries. They're selling hard to get items, especially early on, like flour, sugar, butter. They're selling packaged food for retail sale to take away and things like that. You just need to be aware of the potential hazards with doing that. Not all takeaway containers are suitable for use in hot environments. Not all takeaway containers can sit in hot boxes or bain-maries or things like that as well. If you're one of the hotels doing bulk room service meals, then the times and temperatures that would be taken to prepare those meals are going to be much greater than what they would have been if you were plating one or two meals. I know that a lot of hotels are on reduced staff, and I sympathise with you during the current climate. But we need to make sure that we manage those key time and temperature controls. As I said earlier, from a legislative perspective, especially in Victoria and Queensland, where there's legal requirements around having a food safety program, we need to make sure that all of those legislative requirements are covered. I'm aware of food businesses in Victoria where they've changed their operations, and therefore the food safety program that they have in place no longer covers the types of meals that they are preparing. I know of one cafe that was preparing or wanting to prepare large volumes of meals. They were hoping to prepare about 1,000 meals a day for an aged care group. They only had one underbench oven. They only had one small cool room. So how are they going to produce 1,000 meals with only limited cafe equipment? They were still trying to run their cafe during the same environment. I'm aware of one a charity organisation that was producing, while they had a cafe, they were producing packaged meals for homeless people and packaged meals for foreign workers that were not covered by the JobKeeper. Because that turned them from a retail outlet into a manufacturer, they then needed to go and put in a food safety program to cover those products that they were producing, as well as how they were being packaged and transported as well. If you've increased the volume of food that you're doing, do you have the right equipment to do that? Are the packaging materials that you're using safe? So not all plastics are heat stable. So if you're using vacuum sealed bags or you're using plastic containers, get assurances from your suppliers that those packaging materials are safe for use at those particular temperatures. If you're packaging food, depending on who's produced it and where you're selling it, there may be labelling that's required or not required. So just work out, if your particular product needs to have ingredient labels, if it needs to have shelf life, if it needs to have nutritional panels, etc. Many of you will be offering operations that are providing food for less people than what you would like to be doing. I'm aware of one hotel, at least, where the reception desk staff help out in the bar. So do those reception staff have the appropriate food safety skills and knowledge when they're preparing and serving food in that bar environment? I know of one 5-star hotel where the chief steward is the breakfast chef at the moment, and they're currently doing breakfast as well as in-room dining. So while they may be a fantastic cleaner and operating kitchens in a very hygienic manner, do they know what temperature the chicken needs to be cooked to? Do they know how long they need to keep particular foods for? In the past, you might have been doing mise en place every day and there wasn't really any issues with how long you were keeping it for. If you were only doing 20 people or 40 people or 50 people, how long are you preparing food for, and how long are you now going to keep it for? Instead of keeping it for 1 or 2 days, you may have food in the fridge that's there for 5, 6, 7 days. So just make sure that you either prepare less or replace those foods depending on what they are. I would recommend that you reconsider your menus with the limitations on the number of guests that you can have. Maybe take off some of the dishes that take a long time to prepare. Do we need to have a thick cut steak? Do we need to have soufflés? Do we need to have these dishes that take a long time to prepare? Or can we reduce our menu with slightly less offerings to increase that turnover and make service quicker? If we've got reduced employees, reducing the size of your menu might also help as well. Not all foods transfer very well to takeaway or for room service. I was in Sydney a couple of weeks ago, and I went to a Japanese business, and the food in the restaurant looked fantastic, but when they tried to package the same food into takeaway containers, while it tasted okay, it looked terrible. They just couldn't get the same look of the food when they were trying to put it into takeaway containers. So just look at your menus and work out whether or not you need to make adjustments to the accompaniments that you're using. Do we need to look at different packaging materials? Do we need to replace one menu item with something that's a little bit easier for us to handle? I've got some examples here of some COVID-safe practices that I've seen. The photo on the right-hand side is of a hotel where they are wedging all their toilet doors open so that they're not having to have employees push through and touch multiple doors as they enter the bathroom. Obviously, we can't see into the cubicle, but there's 2 doors there that have been wedged open to avoid having shared contact surfaces. The picture on the left-hand side is of a large hotel in their main production kitchen. There were multiple corridors that apply in this kitchen. What they've done is they've put barricades across to make sure that the engineering staff, to make sure that the purchasing staff, etc., aren't using the kitchen as a shortcut to get through to different areas, minimising the number of people that are in kitchens and minimising the risk. They also set up a hand sanitising station at the door as well, just to make sure that it was, you sort of have to step around it. So they made sure that anyone that entered was applying the sanitizer. One of the hotels I stayed at had very large perspex screens on the reception desks. I know that these are quite common in some of the supermarkets and bottle shops and cafes and things like that. This one was a freestanding one that sat quite nicely on the counter. I didn't think it was offensive or restrictive in any way. They also had containers for pens, so they wanted you to sign in, and they had containers of clean pens and used pens. My only recommendation in relation to this photo here would be to separate the used container slightly, just so that there isn't an accidental pen that's dropped into the wrong container. I really like this idea. So one of the hotels that I went to, they had a sign on the table when we sat down, it indicated that the table had already been cleaned. The sign was a double-sided. The sign was double-sided, indicating on the opposite side that the table was dirty. But when we sat down, it indicated that the table was clean, and the sign was removed once the guests were seated. When we left, the sign was put back on the table, indicating that no one was to sit at that table until it had actually been cleaned. When we sat down, there was no cutlery on the table, there was no glassware, there was no water, there was no ornaments, there was no vases, there was no, salt and pepper shakers. The table was completely clear of all of those items. And then the waiter came over with a tray, put down the cutlery that we needed after we'd ordered, put down the water bottles and the glasses for water after we'd actually sat down. In this particular restaurant as well, the employees, I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but the employees appeared to be walking in an anti-clockwise direction. So they'd come out of the kitchen on one side, walk through the restaurant, and then go back into a different entrance back into the kitchen. Just from a guest perspective, I found this signage really really reassuring, because when you turn up, you just don't know whether the table's been cleaned or not, and I thought that this was a really good idea. Probably the most frequently asked question that I'm being asked at the moment is what options do we have for buffets? I know with low numbers at the moment, buffets are probably not economical to run anyway, but some of the options that I've seen, or some of the options that I recommend, include having a buffet, but individually packaging the items. So you can see the photos there where everything's individually wrapped or individually portioned. The guest takes the product and they go back and sit at the table and unpackage it themselves, so that there's not shared tongs, there's not shared utensils. There's no sort of build up of people waiting. A lot of properties are offering box breakfasts, so some of the options that I've seen include an all pre-packaged option that's collected the night before. It can be handed over by the reception staff. One hotel that I've seen had a cold pre-packed box breakfast, with some cereals and juices and a piece of fruit or something. And then on the way out in the morning, they had a choice of a hot item that the guest could then pick up on their way out as well. So some of the items included frittatas or tartlets, egg and bacon rolls, wraps. They were all individual portions that could easily be picked up and handed to the guest without having, bain-maries or portioning or shared spoons or things like that. They were just kept in a sort of a pie warmer and sort of handed to the guest on their way out. I'm aware of companies like Travel Essentials that have changed their name to Select, where they've got pre-packaged minibar options. So you can actually have box breakfasts that have been produced by other companies, and then everything just either sits at the reception desk or might sit in the room. I'm aware of hotels that are only offering a la carte breakfast. I understand the challenge that a la carte breakfast brings to a hotel. What I would be suggesting here is that maybe have 3 or 4 options, and then for guests that are staying multiple nights, maybe change those options each day. So you might have 1 or 2 that stay the same, and then have 1 or 2 that are different the following day. Don't try and have a full cafe menu where you've got 10 or 15 items. Maybe just reduce the offering, but make sure that you change it, because there will be people that are staying multiple days, and they might not want the same breakfast each day. I'm aware of hotels that are only offering room service breakfast. Some of those are collect from the kitchen. The staff aren't actually coming up to the room. Some other ideas that I've seen. I know that the Point restaurant at West Point Casino in Tasmania, they were doing a pre-COVID. They were doing high tea towers for breakfast, where the yogurt, the fresh fruit, the pastries, condiments, a nice granola or something was put onto a high tea tower that went into the middle of the table. Everything was portioned for the number of people, 1, 2, 3 that were on the table. And then there was a limited a la carte, 3 hot breakfasts that they could choose from that was then prepared to order as well. So that way you could have the baskets of pastries and everything already portioned out the back, depending on approximate numbers, and then just put them on the tower and take it out when it was needed. I know of businesses that are doing bento boxes, and I use the term loosely, but the idea of having sort of a buffet in a little box where you might have some fresh fruit, you might have some hot items, you might have some cold items, you know, similar to the Japanese bento idea, where you can have some hot and cold items in the one box. You could easily have the cold foods already pre-portioned in those bento boxes, and then plate up the hot item, you know, when the guests arrive as well. If you're on really reduced occupancies and it's not worth your while opening up, perhaps partner with a local cafe, you know, where you might recommend, or you might you know, provide vouchers for them to go and have breakfast at a local cafe. If that's easier for you to manage than trying to manage the limited numbers of guests that you've got. When we've got our COVID safe plans, what I recommend is that you undertake some role plays to see whether or not the controls work. There's a phrase I use in relation to food safety programs in training that is say as you do and do as you say. So it may be fine that you've got written procedures or you've got written controls in place that describe what you want to have happen, but do they actually work? If you've got staff from front office, maybe get them to go and test the controls that you've got in the restaurant. You know, see whether it works, and maybe get the restaurant staff to come over and have a look at the reception desk. In this particular instance here, this was a hotel that I checked into. There was a blue line on the floor. It indicated that I was to stay behind the blue line, but they then proceeded to hand me a piece of paper that I needed to read and sign, and hand that back to them. So there was nowhere for me to sign that without stepping back over the line and leaning on the counter. So if you're going to have things that the guests need to do, maybe think about how it is that you want them to do it. Whether it's a clipboard that you hand them that can be cleaned, whether we get a banquet trestle and put that in front of the counter so that they can lean down on the table, and work out what works best for you. But without role playing these ideas, you're not going to know whether or not the guests can actually do them. It's great having the controls in place, but we need to make sure that they work. I also think it's important that any messages that you have are consistent and make sure that they can be applied. Some of the inconsistencies or the problems that I've experienced, in one particular hotel, they had signs on the lift in the foyer indicating that there was only 2 guests permitted into the lift. However, the same signage wasn't up on the guest floor. So if a guest checked in the night before, they might get in the lift, they'd be fully conscious of the 2-person limit. But when they're up on the 19th floor and they're coming down the following morning, are they going to remember that there's a limit on the lift for only 2 people? So whatever signage you have in the foyer, I would suggest that you have that signage in the lift, and then also have that up on the guest floors as well. In one hotel, they had signage directing guests as to what they needed to do in the guest lifts going up to the rooms, but in the separate lift that went down to the car park, there were no such signage, there was no controls, etc. Often guests will be arriving in the car park before they actually come up to reception. So make sure that you've got a consistent approach across all of your lifts. I know that especially in late March and early April that finding sanitizer was difficult, and there was some pretty ordinary ones that were put out there. Just make sure that the sanitizing bottles that you've got can be used properly. Some of the brackets and some of the stands that I've seen make it very difficult to apply the sanitizer. So just have a look at what equipment that you're using to control those sanitizers. Some of the sanitizers are a sort of a fobbing spray. Some of them are quite liquid. Some of them sort of, if they get a bit of gel in them, they sort of squirt out to the side. So just make sure that those are kept clean. And if it's a sanitizer that's spraying onto the floors, etc., maybe put a little bin or something like that underneath. I've seen a lot of directional arrows indicating which way they want customers to walk. Sometimes, you know, in Australia we're taught to keep left. Sometimes those directional arrows were not what would be the normal natural practice. So I know that with some of the supermarkets, if the door is to the right hand side of the of the checkouts, then we want the customers to be walking in through the right-hand side. But in some instances, those entrances and exits were the opposite way around to what people would normally do. So, if possible, I would suggest that we get people keeping left and not directing them to the right. A lot of restaurant entrances and exits were quite narrow and congested. So, are there other doors that you can use where we get guests to go out a separate door than the one that they came in? If we've got guests waiting because we've only got limited seating because of the social distancing controls, rather than the guests leaving at the same time as other guests are waiting, maybe we can direct them out through the pool, or we can direct them out through the balcony or somewhere separate, so that they're not going back through the same entrances and exits that the people that are waiting at are congregating. I know that with the contract tracing requirements in some states, there's a requirement to keep contact details. Some places I've seen, they'll actually hand the clipboard and they'll hand a pen, and the guests are filling it out. Some hotels I've been to, it's actually just sitting on the counter, and it's the same pen that's being used by multiple guests when they come in. I've seen businesses that are only offering cash transactions. In this current time, I wouldn't be recommending that. Make sure that you've got FPOS terminals that work. If you've got a no cash policy, make sure that we've got a backup system if one of the terminals are not working. So I've seen it in at least 2 venues where they couldn't actually get the FPOS terminals to work. So just be careful of that. Employees that are licking their fingers to turn pages. Employees that are not practicing the same social distancing practices in place despite the signage that's in place. So you'll see staff congregating together. I saw that when I was at Taronga Zoo. There were 2 staff sitting in one of the enclosures that were sitting so close to each other they were actually touching each other. The staff that are standing around in groups that are not practicing that social distancing control. I've seen businesses where the waitress comes out and she sprays the table with the sanitizer, sprays the chairs, sprays the menu, but they only cleaned one side. So make sure that all surfaces are cleaned. When we're looking at those touch surfaces, think about all of the surfaces that the guests are going to touch, not just the top of the table, but if there's chairs that need to be pulled in, the customers are going to be touching underneath the table. If they've got armrests on the chairs, or there's chairs that need to be lifted in, there will be touched surfaces underneath the chair or on those armrests that should need to be cleaned and sanitised as well. I thought I'd share with you some of my own experiences for work. I've been in Queensland for regulatory audits. I've also been in Tasmania and regional Victoria, and prior to the borders being shut down, I did take a small family break in regional New South Wales and Victoria. So I'm going to share with you some of the experiences that I had during those times. One of the things that I need to stress to you, and my wife sort of fits into this category as well, is that when people are quarantined at home, or they're socially distancing, practicing those socially distancing controls, they're not aware of the changed environment that exists out there. So I've got the comment there that normal's not so normal anymore. So what guests used to do prior to them arriving at your properties is going to be quite different than what they're used to. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there are very limited flights on at the moment. I've got a picture there from Tullamarine Airport. That's the Qantas departure schedule from 9:30 in the morning. That was a weekday, and that was their entire schedule for the rest of the day. I believe there was 2 flights that departed prior to that. Normally there'd be 3 or 4 boards of flights that were listed, but on that particular day, there's something like 8 flights departing Tullamarine. The flights are not at helpful times. So as a business person, many of the flights are in the middle of the day rather than at the start or at the end of the day. The flights are also very expensive. So in mid-June, a flight to Sydney from Melbourne was costing between $600 and $800 each way. One of the flights that I got back from Brisbane to Melbourne, I had two options. One of those options was $1,100 for a 2-hour flight from Brisbane to Melbourne. So while there's not many flights, the flights that are available are often very expensive. When I travelled to Tasmania, there was only one flight in and one flight out of Tasmania each day. There was a Jetstar flight early afternoon that flew into Hobart, turned around and came back out. That was the only flights in and out of Tasmania during that particular week. For many of your regular customers, they've probably eaten at a lounge normally. They've probably grabbed something to eat before they've taken off. But at present, many of those flight lounges are closed. Most of the retail outlets in the airports are closed or operating on reduced hours. There's also delays with border closures and checkpoints. So guests are going to arrive. It's going to take them longer to get out of the airport. It's going to take them longer to get to where they need to come. Many of their regular hotels are closed, and many of the services that they would be used to are not currently available. So if the restaurant's closed, if the room service is closed, a lot of those things that we've taken for granted for so long are just not available. Guests that are hiring hire cars, the desks aren't manned from 6 o'clock in the morning until midnight. The cars are only available at limited times as well. So I know that we keep hearing that things are very, very different, but until you actually get out there and see what those changes are, the changes are really considerable. When I arrived at Melbourne Airport to head to Brisbane, I arrived at 6:30 in the morning on a Monday, normally a very, very busy time. I park off the airport with an off-site car park. The bus that dropped me off was the only vehicle in the entire drop-off area at Tullamarine Airport. There were no taxis, there were no Skybus, there was no one waiting to pick up or drop off passengers. The vehicle I was on was the only vehicle in that entire drop-off area. Other than one Virgin employee that was having a cigarette under the canopy, there was not a single person around. It's really quite eerie, especially considering how busy those areas normally are. So I just want to reiterate or remind you that when the guests are arriving at your properties, what they used to encounter is going to be quite different than what they've had available to them, especially in relation to meals and things like that as well. Think about what your guests have encountered. When I got off the aeroplane at Brisbane, there were about a dozen military personnel that were standing at the end of the gate, and I had to have declarations completed indicating why I was there. The Queensland system was quite stressful in that I had the information that I was told to have available, but it was up to the police officer that I was interviewed with in relation to whether or not I was allowed in. When I went to Tasmania, I had to pre-apply. So the letter in the middle there was a declaration saying that I was permitted to come in because I was conducting those regulatory audits. The Queensland entry pass was an A4 sheet of paper that I had to have on the dashboard of my vehicle the entire time that I was in Queensland. When you hopped on an aeroplane, they're handing out kits that included a face mask, a hand sanitizer, and a sanitizer for wiping down the tables and chairs. So, these are all things that are very, very different than what we're used to. Both Tasmania and Queensland, when I entered, it was full interviews by police, and for the people that were being self-quarantined, they were actually cordoned off and separated, escorted by the police if they went to the toilets as well. So it was a very different experience arriving into both Launceston and into Hobart and Brisbane than what it would normally be. I want to just share with you. I'm a visual person, so this appealed to me. Sorry. I can't get it to work now. There we go. So this is a graphic. I hope you can all see that. But this is a graphic that the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald put together to highlight the number of flights that were operating in 2019, and then they compared that to 2020. So this is an infographic they put together called Silent Skies. So, you know, the number of flights that are travelling at the moment is significantly less than what it used to be. If we scroll on further down, you know, they talked about Sydney to Melbourne being one of the busiest routes. This is what it looked like the Thursday before Good Friday last year, and this is what it looked like the Thursday before Good Friday this year. Okay, considerably different. When we look at the Sydney to Melbourne route, you know, one of the busiest routes in the world prior to COVID. On March 12, the day of the Grand Prix, there were 213 flights that were operating. But 4 weeks later, I think there was 15 flights that were trading. So if you're interested, that Silent Skies demonstrate that Silent Skies graphic put together by the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age, I thought was really interesting. The first time I checked into a hotel, I was very conscious of what had been cleaned, or how did I know that it had been cleaned. So I know there's a lot of focus on light switches and TV remotes and things like that. But I just jotted down all of the things that I went to touch and then sort of had a second thought. So the light switches are one thing, but what about the bedside lamps? You know, we've got the little cord hanging off beside the bed. I get the ironing board out. Has the ironing board been cleaned? What about the handle underneath that extends the ironing board? What about the iron itself? What about the coat hangers that I then go and hang my shirt on that I've just ironed? You know, we're focusing on the remote control for the TV, but what about the remote control for the air conditioner? We've got the door handles, so that might include the door coming in and out. But what about the door that goes out to the balcony? The fridge had been emptied of the minibar. When I put some stuff in there, it didn't feel very cold, so I adjusted the dial inside the fridge to make the fridge a little bit colder. You know, has that been cleaned, or who's touched that? The room I was in had a dishwasher, so has the dishwasher drawer been cleaned? What about the pens and the notepads that are beside the bed? What about the decorative pillows that are on the bed? You know, these are all things that I touched, and I was conscious of touching. So just something I thought I would share. Some of the recommendations that I've put together here, I'm recommending that you train and retrain employees in relation to the COVID safe controls that you've got in place. I've already indicated that I suggest that you undertake some role plays or something similar. We need to empower employees to act when guests and colleagues are not complying with the directions and the signage. I know that for some staff, they're a little bit unsure about what they should say or how they should say it, but you need to empower your staff that if they see something that's not right, then we need to get people separate. When you're talking about the reinforcement, don't just tell them what they have to do. Indicate why it's important that they do it. Okay. Mental health's a big concern at the moment. So with staff that have been stood down or are on reduced hours, just check in on a regular basis and see how they're doing as well. Some of the COVID safe recommendations that I've put in, some of these I've touched on already, but setting the tables with cutlery and glassware after the guests have sat down, and only putting things on the table that need to be there. A lot of the directional signage that I see is all on the floor, but a lot of people are being quite conscious of social distancing, so they're actually looking up more than they're looking down. So put some of that signage at eye level as well. If possible, have separate guest entrances and guest exits. Like I said before, that might be out by the pool or you know, out through a balcony or something separate. If we can wedge doors open so that guests don't touch them or staff don't touch them, staggering dining times, or maybe increasing the hours that you open. Instead of opening at 6, so we want to open at 5 or 5:30 so that we can actually fit more people in. I know that menus are a potential shared contact surface, so maybe getting rid of the old, frayed or damaged menus. Perhaps at the moment replace them with disposable menus, especially if we've got reduced menus at the moment. Like I said, remove items off the table. Think about what happens when guests have got sanitising wipes or they've got face masks. You know, think about where they're going to put those. So when I was on the flights, they gave that that kit that I showed you that had the sanitizer and the face mask in it, Qantas were asking guests to put the face mask and the sanitising used wipes back in that Ziploc bag and then drop it into the bin inside the airport, rather than being put into the pocket on the plane, or stuffed into left on the seat or things like that as well. Try and think about all of the contact points. So, like I said, role play. Sit down at the table. Maybe have your staff meal at the table and think about all of the surfaces that you're touching as well. We touched on training, and I know that Michelle indicated this as well. So the Accommodation Association does have a COVID return to work course, as well as mental health. There's also a range of food safety courses that have been provided, both accredited and non-accredited. I've recommended in the webinar back in April that now would be a good time, while you've got staff on reduced hours, maybe to upskill them or to retrain them. So that when things do get better, they're ready to hit the floor running. Michelle touched on this as well, but there is a COVID-19 return to work course that's in compliance with the different state and territory requirements. It's got a lot of downloadable resources or links that you can go to that provide references and resources for you as well. I thought I would share with you, I forgot to mention as well, for the Accommodation Association, we've also provided a number of COVID-19 fact sheets for our clients. We've been emailing them through to you. For those of you that are not a client or not a member of Accommodation Association, these fact sheets are also on my LinkedIn page that you can access as well. I'm a visual person, so visual triggers work very well for me. I thought I'd share with you some of the social distancing controls and standout measures that I've seen that create conversation, in some instances creates publicity as well. I know that the media is crying out for some quirky stories or some feel-good stories as well. So there's a couple of examples that I'm going to show you in a minute, but with a daughter that's particularly in love with animals, I found this quite sweet. At Hobart Airport, they sort of had, instead of having footprints, they actually had animal footprints on the floor. In the UK, the Daily Mail has been reporting that some of the government social distancing measures are indicating that we need to stand one kangaroo apart. I don't know how many of you have got kangaroos or 3 koalas for that matter, but I just think that the visual message sort of creates interest and creates something different rather than just a standard 1.5 metres. When we were at Taronga Zoo, they had different comments around how far a kangaroo can jump, or that's 8 echidnas apart. Just different ways of conveying the same message. As I said, the media are looking for nice feel-good stories. So here's a couple that I found on Business Insider. We've got a couple of bartenders that were in beekeeping suits. We've got guests in a bar in America that had inflatable tubes to keep them 6 feet apart. There was a nightclub that was offering social distancing dancing. There's a bar in Korea that was offering robot service if you didn't want to deal with a person directly. All of these made the news. So if you can come up with something that's a little bit different, maybe get your sales and marketing team to see whether you can get that into the local newspapers or the local television as well. Try and have some fun. I like this idea that the Novotel at Surfers Paradise, they were closed for a number of months, as were multiple other hotels, but they used the lights in the room to count down when they were opening. So you can see a couple of examples there with the 7, the 5, the 4, the 1. They actually counted down every day, and then the picture on the right indicated that they were open. So this, once again, this made the local media as well. The Novotel in South Wharf, they got a lot of publicity when they turned a love heart into their hotel beside one of the main freeways. At Easter time, the one on the right-hand side is meant to be the Easter Bunny, so they turned their rooms into the Easter Bunny as well. So just sharing some of that love and interest as well. So I know it's a challenging time, but I think that we can still have a little bit of fun, and we can still create interesting conversation just from sort of thinking outside the square. As I said, there's a lot of doom and gloom on the in our media sources at the moment. So if you come up with something good, let the local newspaper know, let the local domestic TV stations know, and that know that as well. There's a number of resources that we've got here that I think you need to be aware of. There are some translated resources from both the New South Wales Food Authority and the Department of Health and Human Services. The World Health Organisation's got some food safety guidelines for businesses. The Department of Health has got a lot of posters. There's checklists and things like that on the Produce Marketing Association. And as I indicated, there's information on our LinkedIn page as well with some of those fact sheets. Michelle touched on the partners that have assisted Accommodation Association. So I just want to reiterate the support that these organisations are providing. The phrase "we're all in this together" has never been truer. So I think we all need to work together as a team. That was all I was going to go through. I'm not sure if anyone's got any questions or any queries. I've got my my email address there and my phone number if you do want to contact me directly. But I'm happy to answer any questions, Michelle, if people have got questions they want to ask.
Thank you, Gavin. That was a fabulous presentation. Well done. Everything you covered is relevant to everyone's business. I very much, and we spoke about it yesterday, the role plays. Role plays just really can help build confidence with the staff, because it's being customer service people. They need to take roles with this changing environment that they haven't had to do before. And so, as you suggested, role play everything so they just feel confident. And also you can pick up, everyone can pick up, oh, did you do this? Did you do that? So I love that suggestion. And also your visual messaging, fantastic. So, and the hotels that have made, took the positive and had a bit of fun with the new conditions. I think that's great. And our partner and New Creation Print can help everyone with creating those visual messages. So they've got the standard, but I'm sure they'll be able to help you with those messages. Now, I think you were so thorough. There's no questions. It was an excellent presentation. If anyone hasn't downloaded the Accommodation Association COVID Hotel Recovery Guide, do it. It's on our website. It is changed. It will be changed to keep up with the changing conditions. But Gavin's tips regarding what you require in terms of food hygiene, etc., are in that guide. And then we're recording this presentation, so you can go back and go step by step through Gavin's presentation. Actually, Gavin, we've got one question. What are your recommendations for cutlery for patrons in food service dining, cleaned and plastic wrapped or envelopes?
I know that a lot of hotels have environmental certifications and standards as well. I don't know whether wrapping them in plastic would be the best option. I think if they've been cleaned and sanitised and set for the guest after the guest has arrived, that would be the best solution. If you want to have, I've seen hotels where they've got it folded inside the napkin, so that they actually pick up the napkin without touching the cutlery, and they put the folded napkin with the knife and the fork inside the napkin with the handles up, not the blades up.
Thank you, Gavin. Gavin's details is on the screen. For all members, the information is on our website. Reach out to Gavin if he can assist you with any of your requirements. Also, look at all his training options, the COVID Return to Work app. They're all great. And Gavin actually can go into your business to help you consult. Is there anything else you'd like to just mention about the service you provide, Gavin?
We work with people that want to do the right thing. So whoever that, if you want help in relation to anything food safety related, then we're willing to work with you. So we're lucky that we've got some very good clients that want to do things the right way. They might not necessarily like what they hear the first time, but if you want to do it right, then let us know, and we're happy to help you. So one thing I did forget to put in the presentation though, I would be stressing to employees to download the COVID Safe app. I'm really surprised at the low numbers of people that have subscribed to that particular app. I would be recommending that everyone have that just to help. So I should have included that in the presentation as well.
Yes, totally agree. And all that information is in our COVID Safe Hotel Recovery Guide that is complimentary to download and is relevant for all hospitality business. So go onto our website. Like this, there's supporting webinars, a series of supporting webinars to assist you with the COVID Hotel Safe Recovery Guide. Gavin, we've got a few more few more comments, but it's all just congratulating you on a great presentation. They're flooding through. So well done. I think it was just extremely relevant to the audience. So great presentation. One query, can we access the recording of this webinar? Yes, it will be live, I think this afternoon or tomorrow. And there was just so much information. So I do think a lot of people who sat on this presentation will go back and go through slide by slide. It was excellent. So we're 6 minutes over, but thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Gavin.
No worries. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you for everyone that took the time to listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.